Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring time travel, Volume 3. Blank by Randall Garrett. And It Comes Out Here by Lester Del Rey. A Hitch in Time by Frederik Pohl. Spoken for by Joseph Samachson. The Fugitives by Malcolm B. Morehart, Jr. Blank by Randall Garrett, originally published in Infinity, June 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Bethelman came to quite suddenly and found himself standing on the corner of 44th Street and Madison Avenue. He was dizzy for a moment, not from any physical cause, but from the disorientation. The last thing he could remember, he had been sitting in a bar in Boston talking to Dr. Elijah Kamirov. After the interview was over, they had had a few drinks and then a few more. After that, things began to get hazy. Bethelman rubbed his head. It wasn't like a hangover. His head felt perfectly fine. But how in the devil had he gotten here? He looked around. No one was paying any attention to him, but no one pays any attention to anyone on the streets of New York. Still feeling queer, he headed east on 44th Street. He wanted to sit down for a bit, and the nearest place was a little bar halfway between Madison Avenue and Grand Central Station. He went in and ordered a beer. What the hell had happened? He'd had too much to drink on several occasions, but he'd never gone to sleep in one city and awakened in another. Dr. Kamirov must have put him on the plane. The biochemist didn't drink much and had probably been in a better shape than Bethelman had been. He glanced at his watch. 2:15. Wow! The city editor would be wondering where he was. He went to the phone, dropped in a dime, and dialed the city desk. When the editor's voice answered, he said, "Hickman, this is Bethelman. I'm sorry I'm late, but—" "Late?" interrupted Hickman. "What are you talking about? You've only been gone half an hour. You sick or something?" "I don't feel too good," Bethelman admitted confusedly. "That's what you said when you left. Hell, man, take the rest of the day off. It's Friday. You don't need to show up until Monday if you don't want to, okay?" "Yeah," said Bethelman. "Sure." His mind still didn't want to focus properly. "Okay, boy," said Hickman, "and thanks again for the tip. Who'd have thought Baby Joe would come in first? See you Monday." And he hung up. Bethelman stood there, looking foolish for a full 5 seconds. Then things began to connect up. Friday? It shouldn't be Friday. He cradled the phone and walked over to the bar where the barman was assiduously polishing a beer glass. "What day is this?" he asked. "Friday," said the white-jacketed barman, looking up from the shell of gleaming glass. "I mean the date," Bethelman corrected. 15th, I think." He glanced at a copy of the Times that lay on the bar. "Yeah, 15th. Bethelman sat down heavily on the bar stool. The 15th? Somewhere he had lost 2 weeks. He searched his memory for some clue, but found nothing. His memory was a perfect blank for those 2 weeks. Automatically, his hand went to his shirt pocket for cigarettes. He pulled out the pack and started to shake one out. It wouldn't shake, so he stuck his finger in the half-empty pack to dislodge a cigarette. There was a roll of paper stuck in it. He took it out and unrolled it. It was a note. "You're doing fine. You know something's wrong, but you don't know what. Go ahead and investigate. I guarantee you'll get the answers. But be careful not to get anyone too suspicious. You don't want to get locked up in the booby bin. I suggest you try Marco's first." The note was unsigned, but Bethelman didn't need a signature. The handwriting was his own. He looked at himself in the mirror behind the bar. He was clean-shaven, which he hadn't been when he was drinking with Dr. Kameroff in Boston. Also, he was wearing his tweed topcoat, which he had left in New York. A search of his pockets revealed the usual keys and change. In his billfold was $300 in cash, more than he'd ever carried around in his life, and a receipt for a new $20 hat. The receipt was dated the 10th. He took off his hat and looked at it, brand new, with his initials on the sweatband. Evidently, he'd been doing something the past 2 weeks, but what? He remembered talking to Kameroff about the variability of time, something about a man named Dunn, and he remembered the biochemist saying that time travel was physically impossible. For a second or two, Bethelman wondered whether he'd been projected into the future somehow, but if he had, he reasoned, he'd still be wearing the same clothes he'd had on in Boston. No, he decided, it's something else. I've gone off my rocker. I'm daffy as a dung beetle. What I need is a good psychiatrist. But that didn't explain the note. He took it out and looked at it again. It still said the same thing. He decided that before he went to a psychiatrist, he'd do what the note said. He'd go to Marco's. After all, if he couldn't trust himself, who could he trust? Marco's was a little place down on 2nd Avenue. It wasn't the most elite bar in New York, but it wasn't the worst dive either. Marco was standing near the door when Bethelman entered. "Ah, Mr. Bethelman, the package you were expecting is here. The, gentleman left it." The beaming smile on his face was a marvel to behold. "Thanks," Bethelman said. Marco dived behind the bar and came up with a package wrapped in brown paper and an envelope addressed to Bethelman. The package was about 3 inches wide, a little less than 6 inches long, and nearly an inch thick. He slid it into his topcoat pocket and tore open the envelope. "There should be close to $10,000 in the package," the note said. "You promised Marco $1,000 of it if number 3671, which, of course, it did. He got hold of the runner for you." Again, the note was in his own handwriting. He gave Marco the 1,000 and left. There were some things he'd have to find out. He went to his apartment on 86th Street and put in a long-distance call to Dr. Elijah Kameroff in Boston. After an hour, he was informed that Dr. Kameroff was out of town and was not expected back for 2 weeks. Where had he gone? That was confidential. Dr. Kameroff had some work to do and did not wish to be disturbed. Bethelman cursed the biochemist roundly and then went to his private files where he kept clippings of his own stories. Sure enough, there were coverages of several things over the past 2 weeks, all properly bylined. 2 weeks before, he had written the little article on research being done on cancer at Boston University School of Medicine, most of which he had gotten from Dr. Kameroff. No clues there. He'd evidently been behaving naturally for the past 2 weeks. But why couldn't he remember it? Why was his memory completely blanked out? He had to know. He spent the next 2 weeks running down his activities during the blank period, and the more he worked, the more baffled he became. He had never been a gambling man, but he seemed to have become one over those 2 weeks, and a damned lucky one at that. Horse races, the numbers game, even the stock market, all seemed to break right for him. In the blank 2 weeks, Bethelman had made himself close to $50,000, and every so often he'd come across a little note from himself, telling them that he was doing fine. Once, a note he found in his bureau drawer tucked among the socks, told him to invest every cent he had in a certain security and then sell the next day. He did it and made another $9,000. It was exactly 4 weeks to the day after he had sat in the bar with Dr. Kamiroff that he found the last cryptic note to himself. It was in his unabridged dictionary, laying right on the page which contained the word he had happened to be looking up. "Tomorrow morning," it said, "you will see Dr. Kamiroff, but don't expect him to explain anything to you until you have explained everything to him." So he would see Kamiroff in the morning, eh? He'd been trying to get hold of the biochemist every day for the past 2 weeks, and there had been no results. That night, just before bedtime, Bethelman drank a glass of beer. 1 glass, no more. And that's why he couldn't understand waking up the next morning with a king-size hangover. He rolled over in bed, moaning, half afraid to open his eyes. "Ooh," he said, "my head." "Want a bromo?" a familiar voice asked sympathetically. Bethelman forced his eyes open. The stocky, smiling face of Dr. Elijah Kamiroff floated above him. Bethelman sat straight up in bed, his eyes wide. The effort made his head hurt worse. He looked around. He was in the upstairs guest bedroom of Dr. Kamiroff's suburban home. He turned to look at the biochemist, who was busily mixing a bromo. "What date is this?" he asked. Kamiroff looked at him with mild blue eyes. "It's the 2nd, he said. "Why?" Bethelman took the glass of fizzing liquid and downed it. The pattern was beginning to make sense. He had gone to sleep in Boston the night of the 1st and awakened in New York on the 15th. Then he had gone to sleep in New York on the 29th and awakened on the 2nd. It made a weird kind of sense. He handed the empty glass back to the biochemist and said, "Dr. Kamiroff, sit down. I want to tell you something." Half an hour later, Kamiroff was rubbing his chin with a forefinger, deep in concentration. "It sounds wild," he said at last, "but I've heard of wild things before." "But what caused it?" "Do you remember what you did last night? I mean the night of the 1st. "Not clearly. We got pretty crocked, I remember." Kamiroff grinned. "I think you were a few up on me. Do you remember that bottle of white powder I had in the lab down in the basement?" "No," Bethelman admitted. "It was diazotimolene, one of the drugs we've been using in cancer research on white mice. That whole family of compounds has some pretty peculiar properties. This one happens to smell like vanilla. When I let you smell it, you stuck your finger in it and licked off some of the powder before I could stop you. It didn't bother me much. We've given it to mice without any ill effects, so I didn't give an emetic or anything." The bromo had made Bethelman's head feel better. "But what happened exactly?" he asked. "As far as I can judge," the biochemist said, "the diazotimolene had an effect on the mind. Not by itself, maybe. Perhaps it needed the synergetic combination with alcohol. I don't know. Have you heard the theories that Dunn propounded on the mind?" "Yeah," Bethelman said. "We discussed them last night, I think." "Right. The idea is that the mind is independent of time, but just follows the body along through the time stream. Evidently, what the diazotimolene did was project your mind 2 weeks into the future, to the 15th. After 2 weeks, on the 29th, it wore off, and your mind returned to the 2nd. Now you'll relive those 2 weeks. "That sounds like a weird explanation," Bethelman said. "Well, look at it this way. Let's just say you remember those 2 weeks in the wrong order. The drug mixed your memory up. You remember the fortnight of the 2nd to the 15th, after you remember the fortnight of the 15th to the 29th. See? Good gosh, yes. Now I see how I made all that money. I read all the papers. I know what the stocks are going to do. I know what horses are going to win. Wow! That's right, Kamarov agreed. And you'll know where to leave all those notes to yourself. Yeah, and on the afternoon of the 15th, I'll blank out and wake up in my bed on the morning of the 30th. I should think so, yes, Kamarov said. It makes sense now. Then Bethelman looked up at the biochemist. By the way, Dr. Kamarov, I want to split this money with you. After all, you're responsible for what happened. The scientist smiled and shook his head. No need of that. I have the diazotimelene, remember? You said you couldn't get hold of me on the phone. You said I was doing experimental work and couldn't be disturbed. Now, just what do you think I'm going to be experimenting on for the next couple of months?
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. And It Comes Out Here by Lester Del Rey, originally published in Galaxy, February 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. No, you're wrong. I'm not your father's ghost, even if I do look a bit like him. But it's a longish story, and you might as well let me in. You will, you know, so why quibble about it? At least, you always have. Or do. Or will. I don't know. Verbs get all mixed up. We don't have the right attitude toward tenses for a situation like this. Anyhow, you'll let me in. I did, so you will. Thanks. You think you're crazy, of course, but you'll find out you aren't. It's just that things are a bit confused, and don't look at the machine out there too long. Until you get used to it, you'll find it's hard on the eyes, trying to follow where the veins go. You'll get used to it, of course, but it will take about 30 years. You're wondering whether to give me a drink, as I remember it. Why not? And naturally, since we have the same tastes, you can make the same for me as you're having. Of course we have the same tastes. We're the same person. I'm you, 30 years from now. Or you're me. I remember just how you feel. I felt the same way when he, that is, of course, I, or we, came back to tell me about it 30 years ago. Here, have one of these. You'll get to like them in a couple more years. And you can look at the revenue stamp date if you still doubt my story. You'll believe it eventually, though, so it doesn't matter. Right now, you're shocked. It's a real wrench when a man meets himself for the first time. Some kind of telepathy seems to work between two of the same people. You sense things. So I'll simply go ahead talking for half an hour or so until you get over it. After that, you'll come along with me. You know, I could try to change things around by telling what happened to me, but I, told me what I was going to do, so I might as well do the same. I probably couldn't help telling you the same thing in the same words, even if I tried, and I don't intend to try. I've gotten past that stage in worrying about all this. So let's begin when you get up in half an hour and come out with me. You'll take a closer look at the machine then. Yes, it'll be pretty obvious it must be a time machine. You'll sense that, too. You've seen it, just a small little cage with 2 seats, a luggage compartment, and a few buttons on a dash. You'll be puzzling over what I tell you, and you'll be getting used to the idea that you are the man who makes atomic power practical. Jerome Pohl, just a plain engineer, the man who put atomic power in every home. You won't exactly believe it, but you'll want to go along. I'll be tired of talking by then, and in a hurry to get going. So I cut off your questions and get you inside. I snap on a green button, and everything seems to cut off around us. You can see a sort of foggy nothing surrounding the cockpit. It is probably the field that prevents passage through time from affecting us. The luggage section isn't protected, though. You start to say something, but by then I'm pressing a black button, and everything outside will disappear. You look for your house, but it isn't there. There is exactly nothing there. In fact, there is no there. You are completely outside of time and space, as best as you can guess how things are. You can't feel any motion, of course. You try to reach a hand out through the field into the nothing around you, and your hand goes out all right, but nothing happens. Where the screen ends, your hand just turns over and pokes back at you. Doesn't hurt, and when you pull your arm back, you're still sound and uninjured. But it looks frightening, and you don't try it again. Then it comes to you slowly that you're actually travelling in time. You turn to me, getting used to the idea. "So this is the fourth dimension?" you ask. Then you feel silly, because you remember that I said you'd ask that. Well, I asked it after I was told. Then I came back and told it to you, and I still can't help answering when you speak. "Not exactly," I try to explain. "Maybe it's no dimension, or it might be the fifth. If you're going to skip over the so-called fourth without travelling along it, you'll need a fifth. Don't ask me. I didn't invent the machine, and I don't understand it. But I let it go, and so do you. If you don't, it's a good way of going crazy. You'll see later why I couldn't have invented the machine. Of course, there may have been a start for all this once. There may have been a time when you did invent the machine. The atomic motor first, then the time machine. And when you closed the loop by going back and saving yourself the trouble, it got all tangled up. I figured out once that such a universe would need some 7 or 8 time and space dimensions. It's simpler just to figure that this is the way time got bent back on itself. Maybe there is no machine, and it's just easier for us to imagine it. When you spend 30 years thinking about it, as I did, and you will, you get further and further from an answer. Anyhow, you sit there, watching nothing all around you, and no time, apparently, though there is a time effect back in the luggage space. You look at your watch, and it's still running. That means you either carry a small time field with you, or you are catching a small increment of time from the main field. I don't know, and you won't think about that then, either. I'm smoking, and so are you, and the air in the machine is getting a bit stale. You suddenly realize that everything in the machine is wide open, yet you haven't seen any effects of air loss. "Where are we getting our air?" you ask. "Or why don't we lose it?" "No place for it to go," I explain. "There isn't. Out there is neither time nor space, apparently. How could the air leak out? You still feel gravity, but I can't explain that either. Maybe the machine has a gravity field built in, or maybe the time that makes your watch run is responsible for gravity. In spite of Einstein, you have always had the idea that time is an effect of gravity, and I sort of agree, still. Then the machine stops. At least, the field around us cuts off. You feel a dankish sort of air replace the stale air, and you breathe easier, though we're in complete darkness, except for the weak light in the machine, which always burns, and a few feet of rough, dirty cement floor around. You take another cigarette from me, and you get out of the machine, just as I do. I've got a bundle of clothes, and I start changing. It's a sort of simple, short-limbed, one-piece affair I put on, but it feels comfortable. I'm staying here, I tell you. This is like the things they wear in this century, as near as I can remember it, and I should be able to pass fairly well. I've had all my fortune, the one you make on that atomic generator, invested in such a way I can get it on using some identification I've got with me, so I'll do all right. I know they still use some kind of money. You'll see evidence of that. And it's a pretty easy-going civilization, from what I could see. We'll go up, and I'll leave you. I like the looks of things here, so I won't be coming back with you. You nod, remembering I've told you about it. What century is this, anyway? I told you that, too, but you've forgotten. As near as I can guess, it's about 2150. He told me, just as I'm telling you, that it's an interstellar civilization. You take another cigarette from me and follow me. I've got a small flashlight and we grope through a pile of rubbish out into a corridor. This is a sub basement. We have to walk up a flight of stairs and there is an elevator waiting, fortunately with a door open. What about the time machine, you ask? Since nobody ever stole it, it's safe. We get in the elevator, and I say, first to it. It gives out a coughing noise, and the basement openings begin to click by us. There's no feeling of acceleration, some kind of false gravity they use in the future. Then the door opens, and the elevator says, first, back at us. It's obviously a service elevator, and we're in a dim corridor with nobody around. I grab your hand and shake it. You go that way. Don't worry about getting lost. You never did, so you can't. Find the museum, grab the motor, and get out. And good luck to you. You act as if you're dreaming, though you can't believe it's a dream. You nod at me, and I move out into the main corridor. A second later, you see me going by, mixed into a crowd that is loafing along toward a restaurant, or something like it, that is just opening. I'm asking questions of a man, who points, and I turn and move off. You come out of this side corridor and go down a hall, away from the restaurant. There are quiet little signs along the hall. You look at them, realizing for the first time that things have changed. Stationery, fountain, surrogate dispensary. The signs are very quiet and dignified. Some of them can be decoded to stationery shops, fountains, and the like. What a zergot is, you don't know. You stop at a sign that announces, Travel Bureau, First Class, Twas Mars, Venus, next, Trojan planets. Spale rates are 2 old within 60 years. But there is only a single picture of a dull-looking metal sphere, with passengers moving up a ramp, and the office is closed. You begin to get the hang of the spelling they use, though. Now there are people around you, but nobody pays much attention to you. Why should they? You wouldn't care if you saw a man in a leopard skin suit. You'd figure it was some part in a play and let it go. Well, people don't change much. You get up your courage and go up to a boy selling something that might be papers on tapes. Where can I find the Museum of Science? Down here in turn left at the sign, Stublos, he tells you. Around you, you hear some pretty normal English, but there are others using stuff as garbled as this. The educated and uneducated, I don't know. You go right until you find a big sign built into the rubbery surface of the walk. Museum of Science. There's an arrow pointing, and you turn left. Ahead of you, 2 blocks on, you can see a pink building with faint aqua trimming, bigger than most of the others. They are building lower than they used to, apparently. 20 floors up seems about the maximum. You head for it, and find the sidewalk is marked with the information that this is the museum. You go up the steps, but you see that it seems to be closed. You hesitate for a moment then. You're beginning to think the whole affair is complete nonsense, and you should get back to the time machine and go home. But then a guard comes to the gate. Except for the short legs in his suit and the friendly grin on his face, He looks like any other guard. What's more, he speaks pretty clearly. Everyone says things in a sort of drawl, with softer vowels and slurred consonants, but it's rather pleasant. Help you, sir? Ah, of course. You must be playing in atoms and axioms. The museum's closed, but I'll be glad to let you study whatever you need for realism in your role. Nice show. I saw it twice. Thanks, you mutter, wondering what kind of civilization can produce guards as polite as that. I'm told I should investigate your display of atomic generators. He beams at that. Of course. The gate is swung to behind you, but obviously he isn't locking it. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a lock. Must be a new part. You go down that corridor, up one flight of stairs and left. Finest display in all the known worlds. We've got the original of the first 13 models. Professor Jonas was using them to check his latest theory of how they work. Too bad he could not explain the principle either. Someone will some day, though. Lord, the genius of that 20th century inventor. It's quite a hobby with me, sir. I've read everything I could get on the period. Oh, congratulations on your pronunciation. Sounds just like some of our oldest tapes. You get away from him, finally, after some polite thanks. The building seems deserted, and you wander up the stairs. There's a room on your right filled with something that proclaims itself the first truly plastic diamond former, and you go up to it. As you come near, it goes through a crazy wiggle inside, stops turning out a continual row of what seems to be bearings, and slips something the size of a penny toward you. Souvenir, it announces in a well-modulated voice. This is a typical gem of the 20th century, properly cut to 58 facets, known technically as a Jaeger diamond, and approximately 20 carats in size. You can have it made into a ring on the 3rd floor during morning hours for 1/10 credit, and you can have more than one child. Press the red button for the number of stones you desire. You put it in your pocket, gulping a little, and get back to the corridor. You turn left and go past a big room in which models of spaceships, from the original thing that looks like a V2 and is labelled First Lunar Rocket, to a 10-foot globe, complete with miniature mannequins, are sailing about in some kind of orbits. Then there is one labelled Weapons, filled with everything from a crossbow to a tiny rod 4 inches long and half the thickness of a pencil, marked Final Hand Arm. Beyond is the end of the corridor, and a big place that bears a sign, Medals, Atomic Power Sources. By that time, you're almost convinced, and you've been doing a lot of thinking about what you can do. The story I'm telling has been sinking in, but you aren't completely willing to accept it. You notice that the models are all mounted on tables, and that they're a lot smaller than you thought. They seem to be in chronological order, and the latest one, marked 2147, Rings Dinapat, is about the size of a desk telephone. The earlier ones are larger, of course, clumsier, but with variations, probably depending on the power output. A big sign on the ceiling gives a lot of dope on atomic generators, explaining that this is the first invention which leaped full-blown into basically final form. You study it, but it mentions casually the inventor without giving his name. Either they don't know it, or they take it for granted that everyone does, which seems more probable. They call attention to the fact that they have the original model of the first atomic generator built, complete with design drawings, original manuscript on operation, and full patent applications. They state that it has all major refinements, operating on any fuel, producing electricity at any desired voltage up to 5 million, any chosen cyclic rate from direct current to 1,000 megacycles, and any amperage up to 1,000, its maximum power output being 50 kilowatts, limited by the current carrying capacity of the outputs. They also mention that the operating principle is still being investigated, and that only such refinements as better alloys and the addition of magnetic and nucleatric current outlets have been added since the original. So you go to the end and look over the thing. It's simply a square box with a huge plug on each side and a set of vernier controls on top, plus a little hole marked in old-style spelling. Drop BBs or wire here. Apparently that's the way it's fueled. It's about 1 foot on each side. Nice, the guard says over your shoulder. It finally wore out one of the cathode grids and we had to replace that, but otherwise it's exactly as the great inventor made it, and it still operates as well as ever. Like to have me tell you about it? Not particularly, you begin, and then realize bad manners might be conspicuous here. While you're searching for an answer, the guard pulls something out of his pocket and stares at it. Fine, fine. The mayor of Alta Sacarba, Centaurian, you know, is arriving. But I'll be back in about 10 minutes. He wants to examine some of the weapons for a monograph on Centaurian primitives compared to 19th century man. You'll pardon me? You pardon him pretty eagerly, and he wanders off happily. You go up to the head of the line, to that Rinks Diner Patter, or whatever it transliterates to. That's small, and you can carry it. But the darn thing is absolutely fixed. You can't see any bolts, but you can't budge it either. You work down the line. It'd be foolish to take the early model if you can get one with built-in magnetic current terminals, Ehrenhaft or some other principle, and nuclear binding force energy terminals. But they're all held down by the same whatchamacallem effect. And finally, you're right back beside the original first model. It's probably bolted down too, but you try it tentatively, and you find it moves. There's a little sign under it, indicating you shouldn't touch it, since the gravistatic plate is being renewed. Well, you won't be able to change the time cycle by doing anything I haven't told you, but a working model such as that is a handy thing. You lift it. It only weighs about 50 pounds. Naturally, it can be carried. You expect a warning bell, but nothing happens. As a matter of fact, if you'd stopped drinking so much of that scotch and staring at the time machine out there now, you'd hear what I'm saying and know what will happen to you. But of course, just as I did, you're going to miss a lot of what I say from now on and have to find out for yourself. But maybe some of it helps. I've tried to remember how much I remembered after he told me, but I can't be sure, so I'll keep on talking. I'll probably can't help it anyhow. Preset, you might say. Well, you stagger down the corridor, looking out for the guard, but all seems clear. Then you hear his voice from the weapons room. You bend down and try to scurry past, but you know you're in full view. Nothing happens, though. You stumble down the stairs, feeling all the futuristic rays in the world on your back, and still nothing happens. Ahead of you, the gate is closed. You reach it, and it opens obligingly by itself. You breathe a quick sigh of relief and start out into the street. Then there's a yell behind you. You don't wait. You put one leg in front of the other, and you begin racing down the walk, ducking past people who stare at you with expressions you haven't time to see. There's another yell behind you. Something goes over your head and drops on the sidewalk just in front of your feet with a sudden ringing sound. You don't wait to find out about that either. Somebody reaches out a hand to catch you, and you dart past. The street is pretty clear now, and you jolt along with your arms seeming to come out of the sockets and that atomic generator getting heavier at every step. Out of nowhere, something in a blue uniform about 6 feet tall and on the beefy side appears, and the badge hasn't changed much. The cop catches your arm, and you know you're not going to get away, so you stop. You can't exert yourself that hard in this heat, fellow, the cop says. There are laws against that without a yellow sticker. Here, let me grab you a taxi. Reaction sets in a bit, and your knees begin to buckle, but you shake your head and come up for air. I left my money home, you begin. The cop nods. That explains it. Fine. I won't have to give an appearance schedule. But you should have come to me. He reaches out and taps the pedestrian lightly on the shoulder. Sir, an emergency request. Will you help this gentleman? The pedestrian grins, looks at his watch and nods. How far? You did notice the name of the building from which you came, and you mutter it. The stranger nods again, reaches out and picks up the other side of the generator, blowing a little whistle the cop hands him. Pedestrians begin to move aside, and you and the stranger jog down the street at a trot, with a nice clear path, while the cop stands beaming at you both. That way it isn't so bad, and you begin to see why I decided I might like to stay in the future. But all the same, the organized cooperation here doesn't look too good. The guard can get the same and be there before you. And he is! He stands just inside the door of the building as you reach it. The stranger lifts an eyebrow and goes off at once when you nod at him, not waiting for thanks. And the guard comes up, holding some dinkus in his hand about the size of a big folding camera and not too dissimilar in other ways. He snaps it open, and you get set to duck. "You forgot the prints, monograph, and patent applications," he said. "They go with the generator. We don't like to have them separated. A good thing I knew the production office of Atoms and Actions was in this building. Just let us know when you're finished with the model, and we'll pick it up." You swallow several sets of tonsils you had removed years before, and take the bundle of papers he hands you out of the little case. He pumps you for some more information, which you give him at random. It seems to satisfy your amiable guard friend. He finally smiles in satisfaction and heads back to the museum. You still don't believe it, but you pick up the atomic generator and the information sheets, and you head down toward the service elevator. There is no button on it. In fact, there's no door there. You start looking for other doors or corridors, but you know this is right. The signs along the halls are the same as they were. Then there's a sort of cough, and something dilates in the wall. It forms a perfect door, and the elevator stands there, waiting. You get in, gulping out something about going all the way down, and then wonder how a machine geared for voice operation can make anything of that. What the deuce would that lowest basement be called? But the elevator has closed and is moving downward in a hurry. It coughs again, and you're at the original level. You get out and realize you don't have a light. You'll never know what you stumbled over, but somehow you move back in the direction of the time machine, bumping against boxes, staggering here and there, and trying to find the right place by sheer feel. Then a shred of dim light appears. It's the weak light in the time machine. You've located it. You put the atomic generator in the luggage space, throw the papers down beside it, and climb into the cockpit, sweating and mumbling. You reach forward toward the green button and hesitate. There's a red one beside it, and you finally decide on that. Suddenly, there's a confused yell from the direction of the elevator, and a beam of light strikes against your eyes, with a shout punctuating it. Your finger touches the red button. You'll never know what the shouting was about, whether they finally doped out the fact that they've been robbed, or whether they were trying to help you. You don't care which it is. The field springs up around you, and the next button you touch, the one on the board that hasn't been used so far, sends you off into nothingness. There is no beam of light. You can't hear a thing, and you're safe. It isn't much of a trip back. You sit there, smoking, letting your nerves settle back to normal. You noticed a third set of buttons with some pencil marks over them. Press these to return to yourself 30 years. And you begin waiting for the air to get stale. It doesn't, because there is only one of you this time. Instead, everything flashes off, and you're sitting in the machine in your own backyard. You'll figure out the cycle in more details later. You get into the machine in front of your house, go to the future of the sub-basement, land in your backyard, and then hop back 30 years to pick up yourself landing in front of your house. Just that. But right then, you don't care. You jump out and start pulling out that atomic generator and taking it inside. It isn't hard to disassemble, but you don't learn a thing. Just some plates of metal, some spiral coils, and a few odds and ends, all things that can be made easily enough, all obviously of common metals. But when you put it together again, about an hour later, you notice something. Everything in it is brand new, and there's one set of copper wires missing. It won't work. You put some number 12 house wire in, exactly like the set on the other side, drop in some iron filings, and try it again. Now with the controls set at 120 volts, 60 cycles, and 15 amperes, you get just that. You don't need the power company anymore. And you feel a little happier when you realize that the luggage space wasn't insulated from time effects by a field, so the motor has moved backward in time somehow and is back to its original youth, minus the replaced wires the guard mentioned, which probably wore out because of the makeshift job you've just done. But you begin getting more of a jolt when you find that the papers are all in your own writing, that your name is down as the inventor, and that the date of the patent application is 1951. It will begin to soak in then. You pick up an atomic generator in the future and bring it back to the past, your present, so that it can be put in the museum with you as the inventor, so you can steal it to be the inventor. And you do it in a time machine which you bring back to yourself to take yourself into the future to return to take back to yourself. Who invented what? And who built which? Before long, your riches from the generator are piling in. Little kids from school are coming around to stare at the man who changed history and made atomic power so common that no nation could hope to be anything but a democracy and a peaceful one, after some of the worst times in history for a few years. Your name eventually becomes as common as Ampere or Faraday or any other spelt without a capital letter. But you're thinking of the puzzle. You can't find any answer. One day you come across an old poem, something about some folks calling it evolution and others calling it God. You go out, making a few provisions for the future, and come back to climb into the time machine that's waiting in the building you had put around it. Then you'll be knocking on your own door 30 years back, or right now from your view, and telling your younger self all these things I'm telling you. But now, well, the drinks are finished. You're woozy enough to go along with me without protest, and I want to find out just why those people up there came looking for you and shouting before the time machine left. Let's go.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. A Hitch in Time by Frederik Pohl, writing as James McCrae, originally published in Thrilling Wonder Stories, June 1947. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Obviously, the man was dying, and there was no chance that he ever would be discovered. I blessed the carelessness that had caused me to set the space-time dials a little off when I began this journey to the distant past. I had come to this barbaric era in the proper time, indeed, but millions of miles removed from it in space. It had been only after an annoying search that I had discovered Earth, jetted toward it in my space drive suit, and had come down out of the skies to land on this tiny deserted island in the middle of an empty sea. But it was incredible luck that had brought me there, for I had found exactly what I needed, a man who would give me information, clothing, and an identity, and then die and obliterate the record of my interference with the course of events. I, Thom Ra, walked toward him, feeble though he was. He opened his eyes and stared at me. "Thank heaven," he whispered, in the thick, hideous language of that era. "I couldn't have lasted much longer if you hadn't found me." He fell back and smiled at me with heartfelt gratitude, and for a moment I felt a wild, fleeting impulse to help him, to save his life. But of course I dared not interfere, for that would change the shape of the future, and that meant destruction for me. When I blasted off from the island, a little later, he was dead, and I was wearing his uniform and his name. He gave me information before he died, and I had no trouble locating the spot I wanted. I waited till dark before landing a few hundred yards from the war dome. Then I hid my space drive suit in a cluster of ancient trees and walked into the building that housed the most murderous weapon of all time. The sentry challenged me, of course, but I was ready for him. After a quick look at my stolen credentials, he sheathed his ray pistol. "Pass, sir," he said, and I walked in, no longer as Thom Ra, but identified as Captain San Requa of the Intelligence Service. At once I saw the atom rocket. It was on the other side of the great chamber, nestled in a wheeled cradle, ready to be rolled out to the blast-off point. Hurrying technicians swarmed about it with the last-minute checks. I walked over, saluted the officer who was supervising, and began to witness events which I had crossed so tremendous a span of years to observe. The atom rocket was a long silvery torpedo, a cluster of tubes at the rear, a snub-nosed warhead at the front. A panel in the side of it was open, and technicians were setting dials according to the figures read off by a white-haired old officer with the insignia of a general on his collar. I listened in awe and reverence, straining to note and remember everything that occurred. To think that I was actually present at the climactic moment of the legendary War of Annihilation. It was the most thrilling moment of my life. Almost I forgot to curse Master Lys and his duplicity as I watched. Almost, but not quite. For the thing was too fresh in my mind, and I was aware that I was still in danger. It had begun with a routine notice that my preparatory work had been approved, and that I was authorized to enter a theme in ortho history for my final citizenship ratings. The theme, I saw with a sinking heart, was the War of Annihilation. I had hurried to Master Lys, my instructor, sure that there was an error. "Master, you give me an impossible task," I had said. "The theme regulations are that I must make a real and complete contribution to human knowledge." "But how can I? We have so pitifully few records of the War of Annihilation. All of them have been studied and analyzed and worked over for thousands of years. There's no way for me to add to what has been written already." He cackled at me in his insufferable Tri-Alpha way. "There is a way," he mumbled, peeping at me out of his rheumy old eyes. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. "The time belts!" And Master Lys nodded. While I argued with him, of course. The time belts were too dangerous. Not one time traveler in 10 returned from the past, even when their projects were as recent as 100 years ago. And the farther into the past one ventured, the more certain it became that return would be impossible. For although the mechanism of the time belts could be trusted, and there was no physical menace that the conductor screens or the catenated guns could not cope with, there was the ever-present danger of fan-shaped time itself. It was the first law of chronistics. Our era is a product of everything that occurred in the past. Should anything in the past be changed, our age would also be changed. Oh, it would continue to exist, but in a parallel branch of time, and there was no way of passing from one branch to another, and if a traveller into the past should interfere in the course of events, he would be bound to the new time stream his actions created, and the unlucky traveller would never be able to return. The branches of fan-shaped time could never be retraced. The man who interfered with the space-time matrix, displacing even a comma in the great scroll of time, would be cut off from his origin forever. The danger was too great. I refused to accept the assignment, even though I knew it would mean I would never rise to the status of Tri-Alpha citizenship, which was otherwise my right. But then I heard about Elrond, lovely, adored Elrondree, and I could no longer refuse. For Elrond's mating indices were posted, and she was a Tri-Alpha herself. Then I understood what had been in Master Lys's mind when it set that impossible task for me. For I knew that the gnarled, worm-eaten old wreck had dared to covet my Elrond. Loving me, she could never be his, but with me out of the way, he might have a chance. I accepted the assignment. Master Lys secured a time belt for me. He was willing enough to help at my execution, and I began my perilous journey through time. I came back to my surroundings with a start. Something was wrong. Subconsciously I had been studying the atom rocket, and now I was jolted out of my reveries as I realized that it did not look as it should have. The ortho history books were clear on one fact. Venus had been destroyed in the War of Annihilation by means of a hydrogen chain reaction, the most deadly atom blast known. Atoms of hydrogen, under the influence of gamma particle bombardment, coalesced to form atoms of helium, and all the incalculable power represented by the odd fraction of mass left over was released in the form of free energy. But the atom rocket before me seemed to be nothing more than a simple nuclear fission affair. Where were the photon exciters, the gamma-ray bombardment equipment? Of course, even a fission bomb could do a good deal of local damage, as shown in the first atom-bombed cities during the Little Wars of the early 20th centuries. But unless our nuclear science was in error, it could not set off a chain reaction of the type that had destroyed the Venusian colonies. Was I in the wrong place? Alarmed, I shoved my way closer to the rocket, staring at it. It was a crude, primitive affair, of course, and it was hard for me to identify its parts. I examined it with frantic curiosity, and abruptly I found myself in peril. One of the technicians I had pushed aside was staring at me, eyes filled with suspicion. I caught his gaze and cursed myself for having acted so rashly. Desperately, I strove to think of a way to allay his suspicions, but it was too late. "What are you doing?" the technician demanded. "Who are you?" I tried to conciliate him. "Captain Sanrek was my name," I said, using the name on the stolen identity papers. "I am." But I got no farther than that. My accent gave me away. "He's a spy!" roared the technician. "Help!" And a dozen ray pistols flashed out of the holsters as the men around us were galvanized into action. I lost my head. Terrified, I grabbed for the safety belt concealed beneath my stolen tunic, touched the button that controlled my conductor screen. The screen shimmered into instant life, and not a moment too soon. Rays from the weapons pointed at me flashed from all sides, sparked against the opalescent curtain of the screen, and were dissipated. I was safe, but only for an instant. For I had made my second great mistake. I was too close to the atom rocket. My conductor screen grazed the warhead itself. Its energies surged through the unstable elements in the warhead. A warning bell sprang into clamorous life. The group around me froze in their tracks, mouths open, faces mirroring fright and disbelief, and the frightful power of the strained atoms within the warhead began to grind toward nuclear fission. There was only one thing to do, and the poor choice it was. But in a moment the warhead would explode, and of me and my mission and the whole future of Earth nothing would be left but a puff of fiery vapor. Quickly I dropped the shield off my conductor screen, trusting that my luck would hold and the men around me would be too dazed to fire the weapons again. I drew my catonator, set it at drain, focused it on the atomic warhead. The twin violet beams sprang out and impinged on the silvery metal, pierced it, and sucked the heart from the seething mass of erupting matter within. Blinding energies were drawn from those toppling atomic structures, surging through the carrier beam of the catonator into the photon pack cartridges at my waist. I had an instant's fear as I wondered if the storage pack would hold all the mighty energies of the warhead, far greater than the maximum load for which it was designed. But lightnings of static electricity played around my head, dissipating brilliantly but harmlessly into the air, and in an instant the danger was over. The bursting energies of the warhead had been drawn out, and the mass of matter inside it was inert. Before me lay the atom rocket, harmless, dead. I had destroyed Earth's most potent weapon. I give those ancients credit for bravery. Dangerous though I must have seemed, they closed in on me without firing their weapons. Meekly I raised my arms over my head. The white-haired general blazed hatred at me from his pale eyes. "Who are you?" he demanded. I shrugged. Carefully I phrased my words in their outlandish tongue. "I am a visitor from the future," I said. "I regret the accident that just happened more than I can say." "Regret it?" he blazed. "Ha! You'll regret it twice as much when you face the firing squad." I spread my hands helplessly. In truth, death had no terrors for me now. A firing squad would seem almost a blessing, for I had destroyed the bomb that would have blasted Venus. Whatever happened now, the future before me was changed, and in a changed future I had no place, and my Elrond would not exist. "Take him out and shoot him," the general cried. I turned to go to my death, almost eagerly. In my heart I whispered, "Elrond, Elrond, my lost love." The technician who had unmasked me interfered. "Wait," he begged. "Let me question him, sir. Perhaps he's telling the truth." The general glowered. "What's the difference? He's wrecked the bomb." But he hesitated and finally said, "All right, question him. The harm's done anyhow." Sunk in despair, I scarcely heard the other officer's sharp queries, but he was hesitant, and I told him whence I had come and why. He looked at me incredulously. "But the bomb," he demanded, "what did you do to it?" I patted the photon pack cartridges strung along my belt. "I had to drain it," I said. "It was about to explode." "Drain it? How?" "With a catonator." I explained to him how the energies of the exploding atoms were drawn off through the catonator beams and trapped in the photon pack. He stared at the tiny power cells, eyes wide but showing a sudden glint of hope. "Can you take that energy out again and send it into another object?" "You mean to energize the atom bomb again?" I said. "No, of course not." He was shaking his head. "I mean something else," he said. "Can you send them across 50 million miles of space?" I stared at him, fascinated and afraid. "I dare not interfere," I whispered. "But you have interfered," he yelled. "You wrecked our chance to win this war. You've got to help us." I stepped back, bewildered. What he said was true enough. Yet all my training, all the warnings of Elrin and Master Liss said over and over, "You must not interfere." Yet I had interfered already. I had started a new time sequence by destroying Earth's chance to wipe out Venus. If I could neutralize that act by helping them now, perhaps there would be a chance. "I will show you how to use the catonator," I said weakly. Silently I adjusted it, slipped the belt off, and handed it to him. He led me outside to where stars blazed in a black night. He looked upward hesitantly, pointed to a brilliant blue planet. "Is that it?" he asked one of his companions. The man nodded. Carefully he took aim, pressed the trigger as I had showed him. Lightnings roared again. The twin violet beams leaped from the muzzle of the weapon, howled up into the heavens. In a fraction of a second, the photon pack was drained, and the pyrotechnic display died away. All was silent. One of the officers raced into the building, pounded the keys of a calculator. He returned almost at once. "At this distance, it will take just under 9 minutes for light to make the round trip," he said. The officer who had fired the catonator whirled to confront me. "Suppose I missed," he cried in sudden alarm. "It is so far. A fraction of a second of arc would make the beam miss entirely." I shook my head. "The beam fans out," I explained, "and a planet has mass, and the photons are attracted to gravity. Even if they should miss, the attraction of the planet would draw them into it." He nodded and was silent. Silence cloaked us all, 100 ancients and myself, all staring up into a mysterious night. 9 minutes passed as slowly as 9 terrible years, but by and by the hands of my chronometer completed their revolutions. Suddenly we saw the catonator beam strike. Above us a new sun blazed forth, kindling like the striking of a cosmic match. Night fled around us, and day came flaring up into noonday brilliance and beyond. Heat poured down upon us, brilliant rays of sunlight more intense than I had ever seen. The dome behind me sparkled and glistened in the incredible radiations from the stricken planet millions of miles away. And for a moment I could almost feel the fierce actinic waves of ultraviolet cosmics and 1,000 other superspectral radiations. Then the peak was reached, and the light began to fade as all the hydrogen was transmuted and consumed. In a moment, the flare of energies was gone, and the pale blue planet had become a glowing orange coal. We had seen 1 billion persons dying in a planetary settee. The vastness of the dead stunned me. I found that I was sobbing, almost weeping, as I felt myself stained with a cosmic guilt. The officer who had destroyed 1 billion lives glanced at me in full understanding of what he had done. He placed a hand on my shoulder, strangely comforting. "It couldn't be helped," he said in a voice that surged with emotion. I nodded bleakly. It couldn't be helped. "It was for the sake of Earth," I said, blindly seeking justification. "Earth was destined to win in my time sequence, and I had interfered. I had to correct the consequences of my blunder." I stopped. Wild astonishment burst through the tragic mask on the face of the officer. He drew back his arm as though he had found himself embracing an adder. "What's the matter?" I asked in astonishment. He stared at me with dawning comprehension and pity. "Say that again," he whispered. "Why, I said I had to correct my mistake. I had interfered, and the time-traveller who interferes maroons himself hopelessly. I had destroyed your weapon against Venus, yet Venus had to be obliterated, or else I had no chance of return. I was lost, and now perhaps I may have a chance to get back." He shook his head. There was compassion in his voice. "No, you have no chance," he said, and hesitated while I tried to take in his meaning. "You see, this is Venus." He waved at the glowing cinder in the sky. "That was Earth up there."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story.
Spoken for by Joseph Samachson, writing as William Morrison. Original published in Galaxy Science Fiction, July 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Half of Jupiter's great disk and most of the other moons were below the horizon when the man stepped out of the plane and changed her life. As far as Carol Marsh was concerned, he was ordinary enough in appearance, and she wasn't ordinarily attracted to ordinary men. He was slightly over medium height, his features were not quite regular, and he had a deep tan over what had started out as a sunburn, so that she decided he had misjudged the strength of the sun on some planet with a thin atmosphere. She frowned as she watched him look around. She was annoyed by the fact that it took him almost a minute to get his bearings, and realized that she was first a human being, and second a girl well worth a man's attention. Even the troubled expression in his eyes was something she held against him. A man shouldn't look troubled. A man should be confident, self-assured in a manner that also assured the girl he spoke to. She remembered that back on Earth John Burr had been completely self-assured. It was startling to realize that it was with this newcomer, whose appearance she had every reason to dislike, that she had fallen suddenly and completely in love, as suddenly and completely as if she had fallen off a cliff. "I'm looking for some people," he said, "but I suppose—" His very voice was ill at ease, and that was something else she should have held against him, and against herself. She had always resented men whose voices betrayed their lack of confidence. "I suppose it's no use," he went on. "I'd recognize the house." "Who are the people you're looking for?" He took out a wallet, and from it drew a stereo picture. 2 children, a boy and a girl, were standing with a smiling young woman in front of a sturdy old-fashioned plastic house. Their clothes were out of fashion by a year or so, but that depended on where you were. Mars, for instance, was always 3 years behind Earth. Here on Ganymede, on the other hand, you might even be ahead of Earth in some respects. As Carol's eyes lifted to his, she saw him staring at the picture with such longing that she at once knew herself for a fool. "They're his wife and children," she thought. "He's trying to find them, and I had to fall in love with him at first sight." His eyes were on her now, and she said, "I'm sorry, I've never seen them." "Have you lived around here long?" 5 years. "Then this can't be the place." He stood there irresolutely and started to turn slowly away without even a word of thanks to her. "My father may have heard about them," said Carol, knowing herself for a fool again. Past experience, she told herself ruefully, had taught her nothing. The thing to do was to let him go and forget him as quickly as possible, before she learned anything about him, before her feeling for him could become anything more than an irrational, momentary impulse. The stronger the bonds of knowledge and interest between them, the more painful they would be to break, and the breaking was inevitable. The house where she and her father lived was a simple dome-shaped building, its walls and furniture both made of a silicon plastic whose raw materials had come from the ground on which it stood. There were rugs and draperies of a slightly different composition, woven on the all-purpose household helper that her father had bought before leaving Earth. They lived comfortably enough, she thought, as she led the man in. But he hardly noticed the house or anything in it. When they reached the library and her father looked up from the book he was reading, only then did the man display interest. The book was a favourite of her father's, and it made him unhappy to cut his reading short. Nevertheless, he turned off the projector, stood up, and said, "Yes, Carol?" "This man is looking for some friends of his, Dad. I thought you might be able to help him." She held out the picture, and, to her relief, her father stared at that instead of at her. Sometimes he was a little too shrewd. If she was making a fool of herself, there was no need for him to know it. He could be a sardonic man, and he did not suffer fools gladly, even if his own family. He was of the opinion that she had used up her quota of foolishness with John Burr. He was shaking his head. "Sorry, I've never seen them. Are you sure they live around here?" "No," said the man, "I'm not sure. I'm not sure of anything, except that they're my wife and kids, and I've got to find them." "Have you checked at the district office?" "I did that first. They couldn't help me, but they said their records weren't complete yet." "They're complete enough, I should think. Maybe they don't list every prospector who runs around without settling down. But they wouldn't be likely to miss a woman and 2 children. I'm afraid that you're wasting your time looking on Ganymede." The man's face clouded. "It isn't a waste of my time," he said. "I've got nothing else to do with it, and I have to find them. They need me." Mr. Marsh looked away from the man to his daughter, and Carol was a little slow in avoiding his eyes. "I see," he said, and she had an idea of what he meant by that. He saw too much. If he knew, there was nothing she could do about it. She said, "Perhaps, Mr." She paused, and the man said dully, "Calendar." "Perhaps if Mr. Calendar would have dinner with us and tell us a little more, we'd be better able to help." "Not a bad idea, Carol. We should know a little more." Carol selected a dinner and pressed the button that would start its preparation. Her father said casually, "You are a stranger to Ganymede, aren't you, Mr. Calendar?" "I'm not sure of that," said the man. Her father's eyebrows went up. Carol said, "But you do come from one of Jupiter's moons?" "I can't remember which one. There are a lot of things that my memory's hazy about. I can't even recall the name of the company I worked for as an engineer." "That may not be so strange. I find difficulty remembering the school where I taught on Earth. PS 654, wasn't it, Dad?" "PS 634, Mr. Marsh corrected briefly. "You see," she said. "Do you remember your wife's name and the names of your children?" "I wouldn't forget them," he said. "My wife's name was Mona." He stared at the wall for a moment, his face without expression. I can still see the way she looked when I left to undergo treatment. Pohl was, let's see, he must be about 9, maybe 10 by this time, and Wilma must be 6 or 7. I remember how scared she was the time she found a harmless little fighter pod. She thought it was going to bite her. "Fighter pod," said Carol. "We don't have them around here. What do they look like?" "They're small and furry, and have 2 feet that look like roots. When they stand still, you're likely to mistake them for plants." "You do recall some things," said Carol. "The little things that don't tell me where to look. I remember the time we went on a picnic. I don't recall how many moons there were in the sky, and the ground began to shake. It didn't do any damage, but Wilma was terrified. Pohl took it in his stride, though." "There aren't any earthquakes on Ganymede," said her father. "If your memory of that incident is correct, you're looking in the wrong place." "I suppose so," he said. "But what's the right place?" "Perhaps if you thought of a few more incidents we might figure it out. It's the little things you don't forget that can be most helpful." What nonsense, thought Carol, although she kept the thought to herself. The little things can be most harmful. They keep the pain and the memory of pain alive and vivid. She remembered little things about John all too well. The careless way he wore his clothes, and the way he combed his hair, the cigarettes he smoked, and the foods he liked to eat, and the stupid way she had let herself fall in love with him. She hadn't even had the excuse of it happening suddenly, as it had happened now. She had begun to love John as he had come to know him, disregarding all the evidence of his selfishness, of his genuine inability to care for anyone else than John Burr. Unaware of what was going on in her mind, Calendar was saying, with somewhat more animation than he had previously shown, "I think you're right, Mr. Marsh. I've kept my troubles too much to myself. Maybe you can't actually do anything for me, but it wouldn't hurt me to talk. I should have done my talking long ago, when they found me." "Where did they find you?" asked her father. "And what did you mean before, when you said you're not sure of anything?" "They picked me up in a lifeboat, drifting someplace between Mars and Jupiter. The motor was off, but the power pile was working, and the air purifying equipment was on. I was apparently hibernating. I might have been that way for 6 months or a year." "And you don't remember?" said Carol. "There's plenty I don't remember, but as I've said, my memory isn't a complete blank. My wife and I and the kids had settled down in a new colony. Exactly where it was is one of the things I forget. I believe now that it wasn't Ganymede. Maybe it was some other moon of Jupiter's. Anyway, I seem to recall having some trouble with my health, and being taken onto an interplanetary hospital ship for treatment. L treatment, they called it. That's where they put me to sleep. What happened after that, I can only guess. The ship must have been involved in some accident. I must have been transferred to the lifeboat." "Alone?" asked Carol's father. "No. There were 2 other patients with me. They were found dead. I was the only one left alive. The bodies of the crew members who transferred us wasn't found at all. They might have gone back for more patients and then been unable to get away again." "Who found your lifeboat?" "The crew of a freighter, who spotted it drifting across a space lane. They took me on board and revived me, but they were in a hurry and didn't have much time to stay and investigate." Mr. Marsh was thoughtful and silent. Carol asked, "Weren't there any records in the lifeboat?" "Nobody thought of that, at least not in the beginning. At first, when I regained consciousness, my mind was almost a complete blank. Then I began to remember things, but not enough. I couldn't recall where the colony had been, and after I had recovered enough to be able to get around, I began looking for my wife and children. I haven't come across a trace of them, although I've been on many worlds." The food had long been ready and waiting. Until now, no one had thought of getting it. He stared as if through the wall, and Carol, after she had set the dishes before him, had to remind him of their presence. When he did eat, it was automatically, without enjoyment. Afterward, her father surprised Carol by saying, "Why not stay with us overnight, Mr. Calendar? We have an extra room, and tomorrow I may be able to give you a little helpful information." The man's eyes came alive. "You're serious? You think that from what I told you, you'll be able to guess where I came from?" "I used the word might. Don't get your hopes up too much." His face fell again. "Thanks for warning me," he said in a flat tone. When, later on, he had gone to his room, Carol said, "Dad, do you really think you can help him?" "That depends on your idea of help. Why are you so interested in him? Perhaps you're falling in love with him, Carol." "I think so." "Under the circumstances, that's completely idiotic. Would there be any sense in asking why you fell in love with him?" "Well, He looked so lost. I guess it's maternal." "As genuine a case of the grand passion as I've ever encountered," he said dryly. "Almost as genuine as your previous experience." Carol flushed. "He isn't like John." "Fortunately, you are right. Burr was essentially a selfish baby. I can't imagine him spending his life looking for a wife and children he had lost. In future, Carol, if you must fall in love at all, do it suddenly. You choose much better that way." "Yes, I know," she said, "except for the fact that the wife and children may interfere. But don't worry, Dad. This time I'm not quitting my job and moving several million miles away to try to forget." "There will be no need for that." His face took on a troubled expression. "You'll have to face your problem right here." "You haven't answered my question," said Carol. "Do you really think you can help him?" "That isn't an easy one to answer. We'll have to prepare him for a shock, Carol. A first-class shock. That's why I wanted to be sure you were in love with him. It may make easier for him to stand." "What things?" Her father hesitated. "Have you ever heard of this L treatment he mentioned?" She shook her head. "I thought not." "Carol," he said, and his voice was unexpectedly full of compassion, "you're going to have a very sick man on your hands. It won't be pleasant for either of you or me, and it's going to be horrible for him, but it must be gone through. He must be told." "For heaven's sake, what is it?" "The L in L treatment," he said slowly, "stands for longevity. That's what it was treated for. But you see now why it was found to be dangerous and discontinued. The reason you never heard of it is that it was developed and discarded 200 years ago. Calendar wasn't adrift in space for a year or two, as he thinks. He was adrift for 2 centuries. "No! Oh, no!" "That's why the clothes in those pictures seemed odd. They've been in style and out again 6 times, with slight changes each time. That is why, furthermore, he can't find his wife and children on any of Jupiter's moons. The moons were first colonized 90 years ago. "But he says—" "He'll never see his wife and children again. They've lived their lives and died and been buried in the past. He should have died with them in his own time and not lived into ours." "No," said Carol. "Would I never have known him?" She was white and trembling, and her father pulled her to him and let her head rest on his shoulder. Mr. Marsh said, "Perhaps you're right. I don't know. Anyway, you'll have to be told. And for your sake, I'd better do the telling." Carol was silent, and they both thought of the sleeping man who didn't know that his old life had ended, and that a new life was to begin so painfully in the morning.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
The Fugitives by Malcolm B. Morehart, Jr. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, September 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Jeff Engel studied the feverish crowd hurrying through the subway turnstiles. As he checked each passing face against a card index mind, he smiled to himself. Even when off duty, the habit persisted. There was always the chance he'd spot a face that would fit, one that would close another active file in Missing Persons Bureau. A mousy little guy slipped through the turnstile and bumped into a fat woman shopper. Engel glanced at the thin, apologetic face and then at a briefcase bearing the faded initials CG. As a train rumbled in and the noise of the commuters rose, something glinted at Engels's feet. He bent down, curious. It was a cheap fountain pen, inscribed with the same initials. He caught a glimpse of the stranger on the crowded subway stairs. "Wait a minute, mister," he yelled. When C.G. didn't turn, Engel hesitated, then pounded up the stairs into dazzling sunlight. He squinted around at people, and then over low bushes into the city park where he saw the little fellow walking briskly. Annoyed, Engel trotted down a shady walk, then down a quiet lane, and finally reached out to tap his shoulder. C.G. vanished in thin air. Engel slid to a halt and rubbed his eyes. Fearfully he explored this queer illusion, his hands pawing nothingness. There was a roar like 1,000 subway trains, and something invisible and powerful hurled him sprawling. He lay stunned as the noise died away, and then sat up to nurse a bruised head. Someone grabbed his arms, jerked him rudely to his feet, and spun him around. A tall, gangling cop glared down at him. "You been drinking?" What?" Engel stammered. Confused, he looked more closely at this man who wore a grey metallic uniform, a glittering badge, and an oddly shaped holster. "I wasn't drinking. Something pushed me." The cop smirked as he picked up the fountain pen and dusted it off with his gloves. "This yours?" he asked. "Yes, why, no," Engel sputtered. "It belongs to a guy I was chasing." The cop's thick eyebrows lifted. "He lost it, and I was trying to return it," Engel explained. "But he disappeared right in front of me." "Well, that's a new one," the cop said with a cynical smile. He seized Engel's arm and dragged him down the walk. "I'm running you in as a drunk and robbery suspect, bud." "But I didn't do anything," protested Engel. The cop scowled. "We'll see. If you're innocent, you'll get out of CD in a few minutes." "CD?" Engel echoed. "CD? CG? CD?" The initials hopped wildly about in his mind. At a soft whistling sound, he glanced up above a high hedge, and his eyes widened. Gleaming white towers rose up to fade into misty blue, and around them silently darted silvery bubbles. Faintly traced with jointed concentric lines, the skies seemed to curve over him like a lofty and enormous spider web. As he was pulled across a wide street, tall, hollow-cheeked people stopped to stare at him, and he stared back in wonder. "Who are they?" Engel faltered. The cop said nothing, and led him through the low entrance of a tower. As they went down a glowing hall, Engel touched the back of his still aching head. Was this fall in the park causing these hallucinations? Possibly. But before the fall, hadn't some mysterious, unseen force thrown him into this crazy world? Then he had to find it again, and somehow escape back to reality. They entered a large room where lines of gaunt, solemn people stood gravely before grill windows. "The enemy is listening," a sign on the wall warned him as a loudspeaker blared out a garbled message. The cop shoved him into a line. Finally, the man ahead of them fidgeted up to an ugly, hatchet-faced woman who frowned impatiently. "Yes?" she snapped. "My wife deserted me," the scarecrow of a man complained. "I want to—" "Fill out this form, drop it in slot 9, she rapped out. "Next!" "A drunken robbery suspect," the cop said. "Here's the evidence." Brightening, Hatchet-Face snatched up the fountain pen and whisked out a blue card. "Misdemeanor and felony," she breathed sharply. "I'll take the details." Engel clung to the edge of the window counter as the interrogation began. "Yes," he told them. He actually believed something invisible had knocked him down after swallowing up the stranger. No, he hadn't robbed the stranger. He wasn't confessing anything. Yes, he was an honest citizen with no previous criminal offences. After more probing questions and vicious jabs at the form, she handed it to the cop, who dropped it in a nearby wall slot. They waited for a verdict. In a moment, the cop turned to Hatchet-Face, who whispered with him excitedly. Flushed and triumphant, he steered Engel out into the hall. "Alien detection wants you," he growled with uneasy respect. They got into an elevator and shot swiftly upward. As they stepped into a lavish reception room filled with sickeningly sweet perfume, a scrawny, over-rouged girl shut a magazine and jumped to a switchboard. Then a door opened, and a short, puffy man with cold fish eyes bounced up to them. Waving the cop away, he gripped Engels's hand. "Ah, Mr. Engel," he said, smiling. "I'm Commissioner Marston. Sorry about the mix-up, but we didn't realize you were after CG. Come in, please." Bewildered, Engel followed him into an office and looked through spacious windows down at the spires of a city he had never known. Beside a desk sat a wizened old man whose yellowed skin drawn taut over his broad skull gave him a shriveled, cadaverous aspect. He tapped a blue card on a thumbnail as his luminous eyes followed Engel suspiciously. "Dr. Weave, my chief alienologist," Marston said. "Sit down, Engel." Engel grasped the arms of his chair as Dr. Weave scrutinized the card in silence. "Geoffrey Engel," he read aloud in a highly petulant voice. "Missing Persons Bureau, eh? Reminiscent of the 20th century. Is that what you call your detective agency?" "Reminiscent of?" Engel pressed shaky fingers to his throbbing head. If he told them he was from out of the past, how would they react? "Yes," he lied. "I found a fountain pen." "You lone wolves have extraordinary hunches to compensate for a lack of police techniques," Dr. Weave said with a dry chuckle. "But one needs protection when tracking aliens." "Tracking aliens?" Engel said, mystified. Marston laughed, leaned over his desk, and twirled a fountain pen in pudgy fingers. "Take it easy. You're not suspect in this case, but the report says you found this pen, and in attempting to return it to its owner, you were struck by some invisible force." Marston glanced at Dr. Weave, who nodded. Then his voice grew hard. "Did this CG aim anything at you before you were hit?" "No, he didn't," Engel said, and touched his head nervously. "Headache?" Dr. Weave asked. "No, it's nothing," Engel countered. "When I got up, the man was gone." "You mean the alien was gone?" Dr. Weave contradicted him. Engels's throat went dry, and he stared at them. "An alien!" shouted Marston. "Don't you understand?" Dr. Weave smiled thinly. "Mr. Engel's curious to learn the latest about them, and would draw us out in this childish way. I assure you we despise them far more than millions who only read about them in their daily telescripts. Since the flying saucer crash in '68, we've been very much aware of their close surveillance of this world." The doctor's face clouded as he gazed at the city. "The filthy blue spawn of Centauri send us exceedingly clever spies. Before invading our cities, they must seek out our military installations and plant explosives at key points. Their assassins must be ready to strike." Dr. Weave gently wrung bony hands, and Marston leaned forward, his pale jowls quivering angrily. "To safeguard public welfare, this city branch of alien detection must find and exterminate aliens. So far, we can boast of a perfect record, thanks to the new detection screens." "Aliens?" Engel winced, recalling the mournful little stranger. "I can't believe that he's a humanoid." Marston spat out the word as if it were a lump of vileness in his throat. "CG's a sneaking saboteur who conceals his ugly blue hide under a layer of false skin. But he's been detected." "He's detected?" Engel gasped. Dr. Weave inclined his vulture-like head quizzically. "For an intelligent man, Mr. Engel, you seem rather poorly informed." He reached to a cabinet, and across the cathode ray screen trembled a narrow ribbon of light. "As you know," he said, "every act of an organism is preceded by an attitude, and that attitude takes the form of electromagnetic brain waves. The detection screen is quite simple. Sensitive electronic devices under the city dome pick up, amplify, and transmit brain waves to the central control here. Deviations from the social norm wave are promptly investigated." He ran a gnarled finger along the ribbon of light. "Note the low, rhythmic pulsations of the norm wave. A happy citizen at a social task somewhere in the city." He adjusted a dial, and on the screen flashed a spasmodically twitching band. "A variation of antisocial type 3. A citizen planning murder. Criminal detection has a police detail observing him, and before he can strike, they'll take him in custody. Now, CG, the pseudo-man we're having shadowed." A jagged white band leaped in a wild dance. "Even cerebral abnormalities don't register this violently," the doctor said. "The electrical impulses of his artificial brain are powerful. The detectors easily penetrate his feeble brain shield. He thinks he moves unnoticed on his evil mission. But look at his tremendous pent-up hatred and fear." Engel stiffened, his palms moist with sweat. CG was somewhere in this city of the future. Of course, he was feeling terrified, but these witch hunters were mistaking that terror for something else. He choked at a sudden thought. Why hadn't they discovered his own fear yet? Was his head injury somehow protecting him from their sensitive machines? Dr. Weave was regarding him stonily. "Ingenious," Engel blurted out. Marston placed an automatic on his desk, and beside it a box of shells. "Yes, ingenious," he said, grinning. "But luckily for me, these gadgets can't do everything. Trapping the alien is next, and that's my department. Show him the tracer room, Doctor." Nervously trailing Dr. Weave, Engel went to a steel door and peered through a window. For a moment, it seemed as if he were high above the twinkling lights of a city at night, until he made out a dark, sunken room and skeletal figures with earphones clamped to their long heads. They bent over a flat surface illuminated with bright grid lines and sprinkled over with a myriad glowing dots. Gaunt, shadowy faces were fixed on a pip of light. "They place him on the east side of Baxter Avenue, between 43rd and 44th Streets," Dr. Weave explained. He rubbed a lean jaw, frowning. "But how the detectives failed to pick up his presence before he reached the Civic Center baffles us. Seems as if he just popped up there." "I'm ready for the kill, gentlemen," crowed Marston, slapping the holster strap to his side. "You look pretty impressed, Engel." Yes, I am," Engel managed to say. With the doctor close behind, he followed Marston apprehensively down a corridor to a thick convex window. Marston slid it back and stepped into what resembled a bowl-shaped cockpit, a confusing maze of dials and instruments under a hemisphere of glass. Motioning Engel to a seat, he turned to the dashboard and the same spot of light which Engel had seen in the tracer room flashed on a screen. He jabbed a button twice and picked up a microphone. "Marsden to Captain Schaefer. We're coming down." "Yes, sir. The alien's turned back," a strained voice replied. "He's now walking south on Baxter. Might be on to us. He's acting jumpy." "You sound jumpy yourself, Schaefer," Marsden snapped. "Tell your men to hold their fire this time." "All right. I have him on optibeam." Marsden spun a wheel sharply, and they were falling. Engel braced himself as a white glistening tower swung away to the left, and the geometric depths of the city loomed up. He saw the doctor take a gun from a compartment, check it, and stand up wavering. His face was a mask of suppressed hate. "We'll dispatch him quickly," he hissed. Engel squirmed. To prevent a ruthless murder, he'd have to not only outwit these men, but countless police besides. What was worse, with his headache almost gone, his own uncontrollable waves of fear might expose him. "He's running," Marsden said with a nod at the screen. As the globe shot down past white towers, a spotlight on the glass roof flashed red, and a shrill siren stung Engels's ears. Ahead of them, a big globe fled out of their way, its passengers looking back at them, frightened. Black dots on the street scurried to the towers. "I see him," Dr. Weave screeched. Below them, a man was running past a grey wall of huddled people. He looked at them, dropped a briefcase, then sprinted into the deserted street. Marsden chuckled into the mic. "We have him, Schaefer. Not putting up much of a fight, is he?" "No, sir." Marsden glided the globe a few yards above and slightly behind his quarry. As Engel stared down at the man's flapping coat and thin blonde hair, he clenched his fists. It was CG. The siren moaned to a stop, and in the sudden silence that filled the globe he could hear weary footsteps and anguished breathing. Heavy-lidded eyes narrowed at Engel. "Recognize him?" Engels's mouth opened, and his throat tightened. He closed his eyes and nodded. "Halt, alien!" Marsden's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. CG whirled, and they saw a soiled, rumpled suit and a trembling small face. A tear spilled down one cheek. Who are you?" he cried out. "What do you want?" Marsden put the muzzle of his automatic through a gun port and fired. CG screamed and fell. Then in bright, dusty sunlight, he rolled on one side, groaning, and clutched his arm where a dark stain spread slowly down his sleeve. "You disappoint us, alien," Marsden rasped. "Where's your espionage training? Where's the cunning to test our wits?" Soft, pitiful sobs answered Marsden, who barked. "Get up and run for your life." CG got up and limped away, and Dr. Weave turned in surprise. "What are you waiting for? Why don't you finish him?" Marsden grinned. "He's headed for the park, so I'll finish him there. I like some old-style hunting." "Are you taking leave of your senses?" exclaimed Dr. Weave. "What about the weapon he used on Engel? Without this armor-glass, you're risking your life." "If he has a weapon, why didn't he use it?" Marsden fumed. "It's probably in that briefcase he dropped." He bellowed into the mic. "Clear the park!" Numbly, Engel watched CG stumble past police riflemen at the end of the street and crawl into dense shrubbery. The globe zoomed ahead, then poised motionless over treetops as Marsden searched for his prey. "Watch for him," Marsden whispered huskily. But Engel watched the screen in horror. A telltale circle of light, its rim overlapping that of C.G.'s, burned steadily brighter. An alarm bell rang on the instrument panel. Dr. Weave raised a claw-like hand to a switch, then eyed Engel queerly. "Something wrong?" he said. "Stomach queasy?" His eyes fell on the screen. "Another alien!" he shrieked. Dr. Weave's thin lips parted, and his fingers fumbled at the safety catch of his gun. Engel hurled him aside and grabbed at the wheel. The globe keeled crazily. The trees rushed up at them. With a dull crash, the glass shattered, and struggling out of Marston's flabby arms, Engel kicked open the door and dropped to earth. He scrambled to his feet and crashed through high bushes, ducking as a lance of flame charred branches overhead. "There's two of them!" Marston's choked voice thundered and reverberated against distant towers. Engel paused in a dark glade to hear a police whistle shrill and a dry, crackling grow louder behind him. Stealthily, he crept towards sunlight. With a shock, he saw C.G. sitting in the open, exposed and dejected, his head bowed in pain. Engel dashed over to him, hoisted him on his shoulders, and staggered over thick grass to a gravel walk. Then the ground beneath him quaked. The hoarse cries of the hunters faded. Gently he lowered C.G. to a park bench, and an old man nodding in the warm sunshine raised bleary, astonished eyes. Engel turned to see a nurse pushing a baby carriage, and the old familiar skyline of the city smiling down on them. He shook with relief. Like an enraptured music lover, he listened to the faint roar of traffic. "Don't let them kill me!" C.G. cried. "Winos with a DTS!" the old man muttered and stomped off. "They're gone! All gone!" Engel shouted. The little fellow groaned, pressing his wound. "You help me! Your world need not fear us!" Engel spoke to him comfortingly. "Hold on, buddy. I'll get a doctor." He pushed his way through a gathering crowd to a telephone booth. As he stepped inside, he saw C.G. limp quickly to the subway stairs. By the time he had hurried back, the little fellow was gone. Puzzled, Engel reached for a hand railing to steady himself. He had lived a nightmare filled with obsessed men who dreaded blue-skinned aliens from a distant world. He touched something sticky and realized the bleeding C.G. must have clung to the railing as he descended. Then he suddenly hoped he was mistaken. The dark blotch on his fingers could be wet paint. It had to be. It was blue.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. Revisit the futures that never happened. Every day.